Why? The first bullet went through dead center. The second bullet went through the exact same hole. By the fifth shot, Sergeant Michael Ducker's jaw was locked so tight you could hear his teeth grinding from 20 feet away. 5 rounds, 1 hole, and the man who fired them. A quiet single dad in a faded Padres cap who'd just been told 10 minutes earlier that he was going to miss. What Ducker didn't know, what none of those Marines knew, was that the man they'd just humiliated had once put rounds through targets at 1,800 yards in conditions that would make a grown sniper weep. And by the time the smoke cleared from that oceanside range, every Marine standing there would learn a lesson their drill instructors never taught them. Before we go any further, drop the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you love stories about quiet men who refuse to be underestimated, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. The desert wind off Camp Pendleton carried the smell of gun oil, sagebrush, and old asphalt as Lennox Harrow pulled his dust-covered Ford F-150 into the gravel lot of the Oceanside Marksmanship Range. He killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, both hands resting on the wheel, his eyes closed. It had been 4 years since he'd fired a rifle. 4 years since Iraq. 4 years since the funeral. 4 years since the day his wife Caroline had been buried under a flag he'd folded with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and he'd promised the small boy clinging to his leg that everything was going to be all right. His son Caleb was 7 now, sharp as a tack. Quiet the way Lennox had been quiet at that age. The boy was at school today, and the babysitter would pick him up at 3. That gave Lennox 4 hours. 4 hours to do something he'd been putting off for a very long time. He opened his eyes, exhaled slowly, and reached for the rifle case in the passenger seat. The case was scuffed, weathered plain. Nothing about it would catch the eye. Inside was a custom Remington 700 in .308, the same rifle he'd carried through 2 deployments with SEAL Team 3. He hadn't touched it since the day he'd come home for good. It had sat in the back of his closet wrapped in oilcloth while he learned how to be a father, a widower, a man who packed school lunches and braided no one's hair because his wife wasn't there to teach him. Today he was going to fire it again. Not because he wanted to, because he needed to. Because the dreams had started coming back, and the only way he knew to push them down was to remember that he was still in control of the thing that had once defined him. He stepped out of the truck. The gravel crunched under his boots. He was 41 years old, 6'1", with the kind of lean, weathered build that came from a life spent carrying heavy things across long distances. His hair was sandy brown, going silver at the temples. He wore jeans, a faded blue Padres cap pulled low over his eyes, and a gray t-shirt that hung loose on his shoulders. Nothing about him said operator. Nothing about him said anything. That was the way he liked it. He grabbed the rifle case, locked the truck, and walked toward the range office. The office was a small, sun-bleached double-wide with a screen door that slapped shut behind him. Behind the counter sat Ray Mendelson, the range master, a leathery old Marine with a gray crew cut and a coffee mug that read, "I survived. K. Sanch." Ray looked up, squinted, and broke into a slow grin. "Well, I'll be damned," Ray said. "Lennox Harrow." Lennox managed a small smile. "Hey, Ray. Been a while, son. 2-3 years. 4. Ray's eyes flickered with something recognition sympathy, the unspoken understanding of one veteran for another. And then he nodded once and let it pass. That was what Lennox loved about Ray. The man knew when to say something and when not to. "Lane 4's open," Ray said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "Sign in. $20 for the day." Lennox signed his name and pushed 2 tens across the counter. As he was tucking his wallet away, the screen door slapped open behind him, and a wave of loud voices rolled in the unmistakable sound of young men who knew they were the loudest thing in any room they entered. Lennox didn't turn around. He'd heard that sound 1,000 times before. "Mendelson," a voice called out. "We need 3 lanes. Active duty discount right." Lennox kept his eyes on the counter as 4 Marines pushed past him toward the desk. He could smell their aftershave and gun oil. They were young, early 20s, maybe 1 or 2 pushing 30. The man in front, the one doing the talking, was the oldest. Built like a linebacker, maybe 6'2", with a high and tight haircut, a square jaw, and the kind of confidence that had never once been seriously challenged. His shirt read, Scout Sniper Instructor, Camp Pendleton. Zah. Ray's expression cooled by about 10 degrees. Active duty's the same price as everyone else, Sergeant Ducker. $20 lanes 1 through 3. Ducker laughed. Come on, Ray. Loyalty discount. $20? Ducker shook his head, still grinning, and pulled out his wallet. As he counted out the cash, his eyes drifted sideways and landed on Lennox. He looked Lennox up and down. The faded cap, the plain shirt, the rifle case that looked like it had been pulled out of a yard sale. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. Hey there, partner, Ducker said. You here to do some shooting? Lennox lifted his eyes for the first time. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they held nothing, no fear, no anger, no challenge, just a steady level calm. That's the idea, he said quietly. What you got in the case there? Granddad's old hunting rifle. The other Marines snickered. Lennox didn't answer. He just picked up his case, nodded once to Ray, and walked out the screen door toward the lanes. He heard Ducker behind him. Friendly fella? He kept walking. The lanes were laid out in a long, open-air row under a corrugated steel roof, separated by waist-high concrete dividers. Targets stood at 25-50 and 100 yards down range, with steel silhouettes farther out for the long-distance shooters. At this hour, on a Tuesday morning, the place was nearly empty. A couple of older men were plinking with .22s on lanes 7 and 8. Otherwise, Lennox had the place to himself. He set the case down on the concrete bench at lane 4, popped the latches, and lifted the lid. There she was. The Remington stock was a deep walnut, oiled and worn smooth in all the places his hands had once gripped her. The barrel was matte black, not a speck of rust. He'd cleaned her every 6 months, even though he hadn't fired her. Old habits. The kind of habits the Navy beat into a man and never let him forget. Deja. He picked her up. The weight settled into his hands like an old conversation resuming after a long silence. For a moment, just a moment, his throat tightened. Then he set her down on the bench, opened a small leather pouch, and began laying out his ammunition. 20 rounds of match-grade .308. He didn't need 20. He probably wouldn't fire more than 10, but laying them out was part of the ritual, and the ritual was part of what he'd come here for. Down at the other end of the range, the 4 Marines were setting up on lanes 1, 2, and 3. Ducker was on lane 2, holding court, his voice carrying across the concrete in the way men's voices carry when they want to be heard. And I told the LT, sir, with all due respect, if you can't put 3 rounds in a man-sized target at 400 yards, you got no business calling yourself a Marine. The other Marines laughed on cue. Lennox tuned them out. He pulled a small range card from his shirt pocket, unfolded it, and clipped it to the corner of his bench. He checked the wind light, maybe 3 miles an hour coming in from the southwest. He noted the temperature, the humidity. He didn't need to. He could feel all of it in his skin. But he wrote it down anyway, because that was what you did. He was loading his first round into the magazine when a shadow fell across his bench. He didn't look up. What you got there, partner? It was Ducker, standing 2 feet away, hands on his hips, head tilted to one side like he was inspecting a dog at a county fair. Remington, Lennox said. Yeah, I can see that. What model? 700. Ducker whistled. 700. That's a deer rifle, ain't it? Lennox slid the round into the magazine. Among other things. You hunt much? Not anymore. Ducker scratched his chin, still smiling. Mind if I take a look? I do mind, actually. Ducker's eyebrows went up. The smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did a small, hard glint. He wasn't used to being told no. Especially not by a man in a faded Padres cap. Well, all right then, Ducker said, his voice still light. Just trying to be friendly. We don't see a lot of civilians out here on a weekday. Most of these benches are filled with Marines. That's so. Yeah, so. Ducker leaned against the divider, settling in. What brings you out today? Lennox finished loading the magazine. 5 rounds. He set it down on the bench. Just wanted to put some rounds down range, he said. Yeah. You any good? Lennox finally looked up. His eyes met Ducker's and held them. I get by, he said. Ducker grinned. I get by. I like that. Modest. You ever serve partner? There it was. The question. No. For a long moment, Lennox didn't answer. He could have said yes. He could have said, Navy 18 years, 4 deployments, 3 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star. I never wear. He could have said, I've forgotten more about marksmanship than you'll ever learn, son. He didn't say any of those things. A while back, he said. Yeah? What branch? Doesn't really matter. Ducker laughed loud and theatrical, throwing his head back so the other Marines down the line would notice. Doesn't matter. He says it doesn't matter. Hey, Rojas, you hear this guy? He says his branch doesn't matter. The Marines on the other lanes turned around. One of them a stocky kid with a buzz cut. Rojas presumably wandered over to lane 3 and leaned against the divider, grinning. Probably Coast Guard, Rojas called out. The Marines howled. Lennox closed his eyes for a half second. Just a half second. Long enough to remind himself why he was here. He had not come to this range to teach anyone a lesson. He had come to fire his rifle, to feel the recoil settle into his shoulder, to remember that the part of him that had been a sniper was still alive and well, even if it had been sleeping for 4 years. He had come for himself. Not for Ducker. Not for Rojas. Not for anyone. He opened his eyes and slid the magazine into the rifle. You boys enjoy your shoot, he said quietly. He picked up the rifle and turned toward the lane. Ducker didn't move. He was still leaning against the divider, still grinning, but the grin had changed. It had hardened. He'd offered the man an off-ramp, and the man hadn't taken it. Now there was a small audience watching, and Sergeant Michael Ducker was not the kind of man who walked away from a small audience. Tell you what, partner, Ducker said, why don't we make this interesting? Lennox paused with the rifle halfway to his shoulder. He didn't turn around. I'm not interested, he said. $100, Ducker said. 5 shots, 100 yards. Best group wins. I said I'm not interested. 200. Lennox slowly lowered the rifle. He turned just his head and looked at Ducker over his shoulder. Sergeant, he said, I've had a long 4 years. I came here to shoot my rifle. I'm not here to compete. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm not here for any of this. So I'd appreciate it if you'd go back to your lane and let me do what I came here to do. For a moment, the air went very still. Die. The other Marines stopped grinning. They could hear something in the man's voice. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weight, a kind of finality. The voice of a man who had spoken to harder men in harder places and had not been moved. But Sergeant Michael Ducker did not hear it. Or if he heard it, he chose not to. You're not here to embarrass me, Ducker repeated, and the grin came roaring back. You're not here to embarrass me. You hear that, boys? He's not gonna embarrass me. The Marines laughed, but it was a thinner laugh now. Uncertain. Ducker took a step closer. He was a big man, and he used his size the way men like him always use their size, as a kind of unspoken threat. Minty. Tell you what, partner. Let's call it $100. Easy money. You take your 5 shots, I take mine. Whoever's group is tighter takes the cash. Where's the harm you get to walk away with my $100 and a story to tell? Or, he shrugged, you get to walk away with nothing. Either way, you came here to shoot, didn't you? So shoot. Lennox looked at him for a long moment. He thought of Caleb sitting in his second-grade classroom right now, probably drawing pictures of dinosaurs in his notebook. He thought of Caroline. He thought of the long, quiet years of being a man who said yes when he wanted to say no, who absorbed insults from strangers because his energy belonged to his son, and not to fools. He thought about walking away. He thought about it for a long time. And then, very quietly, he said, "All right." Ducker's grin split his face. "Attaboy, Rojas, get over here. You're holding the money." Rojas trotted over, still grinning. Ducker pulled out his wallet, made a show of counting out 520s, and slapped them into Rojas's palm. Then he held out his hand to Lennox. "Your 100, partner." Lennox reached into his back pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and counted out 520s of his own. He handed them to Rojas without ever looking at Ducker's outstretched hand. Ducker withdrew the hand slowly, his grin faltering for the first time. "Right," he said. "Right. Okay then. 100 yards, 5 shots, tightest group wins. Ray." He turned and called toward the office. "Ray, get out here. We got a contest." Ray Mendelson appeared at the office door. He looked across the range at Ducker's grinning face, at the cluster of Marines, at the quiet man in the Padres cap holding the worn Remington. For a long moment, Ray's eyes lingered on Lennox. Then a slow, very small smile crossed the old Marine's face. "All right, boys," Ray called out. "I'll judge it. 100 yards, fresh targets, 5 shots each. Ducker, you go first." "My pleasure," Ducker said. He sauntered back to lane 2, picked up his rifle, a beautiful custom-built AR-10 in 6.5 Creedmoor, with a Night Force scope that probably cost more than Lennox's truck, and chambered a round. Lennox set his Remington gently on the bench. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, hands at his sides, watching. Down at the office, Ray pressed a button. The target carriers began to hum, drawing the paper targets back to be replaced with fresh ones. New silhouettes rolled out to the 100-yard line. Ducker settled into the bench, adjusted his cheek weld, and exhaled slowly through his nose. He was, despite everything, a competent shooter. Lennox could see it in the way he held the rifle. Not perfectly. Not the way a man with 1,000 combat shots held a rifle, but well. Schoolhouse, well. The kind of well that came from being told you were the best for a very long time without ever having to prove it against anyone who actually was. Ducker fired. Crack. A hole appeared on the target just left of dead center. He worked the bolt well, the action, the AR-10 was semi-auto, and fired again. Crack. Another hole about an inch from the first. He fired 3 more times in steady succession. Crack. 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 When he was done, he leaned back from the rifle and looked at the target through his spotting scope. He smiled. "Read 'em and weep, partner," he said over his shoulder. "Group's about an inch and a quarter, 100 yards off the bench. Beat that." The other Marines whooped. Rojas waved the $200 in the air like it was already won. Lennox didn't react. He just picked up his rifle, walked to lane 4, and lowered himself onto the bench. He took a long, slow breath. Then he put his eye to the scope. It was a Leupold Mark IV. Old, scratched, reliable. Through the glass, the new paper target stood crisp and clean at 100 yards, the black bullseye centered in the crosshairs. The wind was still light, 3 miles an hour southwest. Nothing. He chambered the first round. Behind him, Ducker called out, voice loud and amused. "Take your time, partner. Don't want you to rush it, and hey, try not to miss." Lennox heard the words. He heard them very clearly. His finger moved to the trigger. For the first time in 4 years, the world narrowed down to a single point of focus, a black dot at the end of a glass tube. The sound of the Marines faded. The wind faded. The smell of gun oil faded. There was only the rifle, and his breath, and the dot. In the back of his mind, a voice he hadn't heard in a long time spoke up. The voice of his old chief, dead now for 3 years, killed by a roadside bomb outside Mosul. "Breathe out, Harrow. Hold at the bottom. Don't pull. Press." Lennox breathed out. He held at the bottom. He pressed. The Remington spoke, and the long silence of 4 quiet years finally broke. The shot cracked clean through the morning air, sharp and final. The Remington kicked into Lennox's shoulder, the way she always had, like an old friend reminding him she was still there. He didn't look at the target. He worked the bolt smooth and quiet, and the spent casing arced through the air and pinged against the concrete. He chambered the next round, breathed out, held at the bottom. Pressed. Crack. He didn't look at the target. Behind him, the laughter that had been bubbling up among the Marines had gone quiet. Not silent yet, just thinner, like the air had been let out of something. Lennox worked the bolt again. The casing pinged. He chambered the 3rd round. "Hey, what's he?" one of the younger Marines started to say. "Shut up," Ducker snapped. Lennox breathed out, held, pressed, crack. He worked the bolt, chambered the 4th. "Sergeant," Rojas said, his voice lower now. "Sergeant, you seein' this?" "I said shut up, Rojas." Lennox breathed out, pressed. 4th round. He worked the bolt one final time. The morning was so quiet now you could hear the faint hum of the target carrier motor down at the office. The 2 old men, plinking with .22s on lanes 7 and 8, had stopped firing. They were watching too. Lennox chambered the 5th round. He took a longer breath this time, not because he needed it, because he wanted to feel it, the way a man takes one last sip of coffee before standing up from the table. He held at the bottom. He pressed. Crack. The 5th casing arced out of the chamber, hit the concrete, and rolled until it came to rest against the toe of his boot. Lennox lowered the rifle. He set it down on the bench very gently and stood up. He still hadn't looked at the target. Behind him, nobody was speaking. Down at the office, Ray Mendelson was already moving. The old Marine had walked out from behind the counter and was making his way down the line, a pair of binoculars hanging around his neck and his hands in his pockets. He stopped halfway between Ducker's lane and Lennox's, lifted the binoculars, looked. He looked for a long time. Then he lowered the binoculars and turned to look at Lennox. His face hadn't changed, but his eyes had. "Son," Ray said, "you want to go pull that target yourself, or you want me to?" "You can pull it, Ray." "All right." Ray pressed the button on Lane 4's controller. The target carrier hummed and began drawing the paper back from the 100-yard line. Ducker had pushed himself up off his own bench and was walking slow-stiff toward Lennox's lane. Rojas trailed behind him. The other 2 Marines stayed where they were, but they were leaning forward, craning their necks. The target carrier reached the front of the lane and stopped. For a long second, nobody moved. Ray stepped up to the carrier, unclipped the paper target, and held it up against the light. A single hole, ragged at the edges, about the diameter of a quarter. That was it. One hole. Ray turned the target slowly so Ducker could see it. The big sergeant stared, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's only one shot," Ducker said. His voice had gone strange, higher. "He only fired one. The other 4 went wide. They went somewhere else, They didn't go wide, Sergeant," Ray said quietly. "They had to. There's only one hole. There's 5 rounds through that one hole." Ducker laughed. It was an ugly laugh, sharp and short. "That's impossible." Ray turned the target around so the back was facing them. Then he held it up to the light again. Through the paper against the morning sun, you could just barely see the irregularity at the edges, the slight telltale fraying where one bullet hole had been widened, then widened again, then again. 5 rounds. "Sergeant," Ray said. "All in the same hole, at 100 yards, from a cold barrel." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that pushes down on a man's chest. Ducker stared at the target. Then he turned and looked at Lennox. Lennox was leaning against the concrete divider, now his arms folded across his chest, his cap pulled low. He looked at Ducker without expression. "You," Ducker said. He pointed. The finger trembled just a little before he caught it and stilled it. "You? Who are you?" "Just a guy who came out to shoot," Lennox said. "Bull." "Sergeant, that's not nobody does that. Nobody does that on a cold barrel with a bone stock Remington. Nobody." "Somebody just did," Ray said. Ducker rounded on the old man. "Stay out of this, Mendelsohn." "Watch your tone, son." "I'll watch my—" Ducker caught himself. He closed his eyes for a second, breathed through his nose, and when he opened them again, the practiced grin was back on his face. The one he used in front of recruits. The one that said, "I'm in charge here, and don't you forget it." "All right," Ducker said. "All right. Fine. Lucky shooting. Real lucky. You got me, partner. Fair and square. So." He turned to Rojas. "Give the man his money." Rojas peeled the $200 off his palm and held it out. Lennox didn't take it. He didn't move at all. He just kept looking at Ducker. "What?" Ducker said. "What, you don't want the money now?" "Take the money, Lennox," Ray said quietly. Lennox uncrossed his arms, stepped forward, reached out, and took the bills from Rojas's hand, folded them once, and slid them into his back pocket. "Thank you," he said. Then to Ray, "I appreciate the lane, Ray. I'll come back another time." He turned and started packing his rifle. "Whoa," Ducker said. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold up, partner." Lennox kept packing. "I said hold up." The big sergeant moved into Lennox's lane and put his hand on the rifle case. Just laid it there casually, like he was making a point. Lennox went very still. For a moment that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but felt much longer, the morning held its breath. Lennox looked down at the hand on his case, then up slowly into Ducker's face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. There was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not even close to anger, but a kind of cold level attention. The attention of a man who has spent a very long time deciding exactly how much violence is appropriate in any given situation, and who is at this moment doing the calculation. Ducker felt it. He couldn't have said what it was, but he felt it. His hand came off the case all on its own. "Mate," he covered the retreat with a laugh. "Easy, partner, easy. I just want a rematch is all. Double or nothing. You can't fire shots like that and just walk away. That's not how this works." "That's exactly how it works, Sergeant," Lennox said. $300, 5 more shots." "No." "500. "No." $1,000, cash. I got it in the truck." Lennox closed the rifle case, snapped the latches. "I came here for one thing," he said. "I did the one thing. I'm going home now." He picked up the case. Ducker stepped sideways, just enough to put himself in Lennox's path, not blocking him. Not exactly, but close. "Sergeant," Ray said. There was a warning in the old man's voice now, the kind of warning Marines learn to recognize before they learn to read. Ducker ignored him. "I just want to understand," Ducker said. His voice was lower now, almost reasonable. "That's all. I want to understand who I'm dealing with. You walk in here in your daddy hat and your beat-up truck with a rifle that looks like it came out of a pawn shop, and you put 5 rounds in one hole at 100 yards on a cold barrel. That's not normal, partner. That's not, civilians don't do that. So, who are you?" Lennox looked at him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "I'm a guy who used to do this for a living. That's all you need to know." He stepped around Ducker and started walking toward the parking lot. Behind him, Ducker called out, "Used to do it for who?" Lennox kept walking. "Hey, I asked you a question. Used to do it for who?" Lennox kept walking. He'd made it about 10 paces past the office when Ray's voice stopped him. "Lennox." He turned. Ray was standing in the doorway, the old paper target rolled up in his hand. "You forgot something." Lennox waited. Ray walked over. He held out the target. "You earned this. Take it home. Show it to your boy someday." Lennox took the target. He held it for a moment, looking down at the small, ragged hole in the center. "Thanks, Ray. Don't mention it." Ray glanced over his shoulder at the Marines, who were now huddled together at Lane 2, talking in low, agitated voices. Ducker was at the center of the huddle, his arms moving in big, sharp gestures. Ray turned back to Lennox and lowered his voice. "He's not gonna let this go, you know." "I figured. Boys like that, they don't lose. Not in front of their guys, not in front of an audience. He's gonna find a way to come at this again. Probably. You want my advice?" "Always." Ray's leathery old face crinkled into the smallest possible smile. "Tell him who you are." Lennox shook his head once. "No." "Why not save yourself a lot of grief?" "Because then it stops being about the shooting, Ray. Then it becomes about the resume, and I'm done with the resume. I left the resume in a footlocker 4 years ago." Ray studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, son. Have it your way." Lennox turned to go. "Lennox!" He turned back. "How's the boy?" Ray asked. The question caught him sideways. He hadn't expected it. For a half second, his face did something it hadn't done in a long time. It softened. "Caleb's good," he said. "He's 7. He's smart. He's quiet. He's like she was." "You doing all right with him?" "Most days." "That's all any of us can ask for." "Yeah." Ray nodded once. "Get on home to him." Lennox gave the old man a final nod, turned and walked the rest of the way to the truck. He laid the rifle case across the passenger seat, set the rolled paper target on the dashboard, climbed in, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he could see the 4 Marines still huddled, still talking. Ducker's head turned, and for a brief second, their eyes met across the gravel lot. Lennox put the truck in drive and pulled out. Lennox. The drive home took 28 minutes. Lennox knew this because he'd made the drive 1,000 times. He drove in silence. No radio. He just listened to the engine and watched the road, and let his hands rest on the wheel. He didn't think about the contest. He didn't think about Ducker. He didn't think about the 5 rounds through one hole, or the look on Ray's face when he'd held up the target, or the way the Marines had gone quiet on the second shot. He thought about Caroline, but he thought about the day she died, the hospital corridor, the young doctor with the kind eyes who had said the word aneurysm 3 times before Lennox had understood what he was hearing. He thought about Caleb, 3 years old at the time, holding his mother's hand in the bed and patting it the way she used to pat his when he was sick. And he thought about how in the 4 years since he had become a very small man, a man who shopped at the same grocery store on the same days, a man who packed lunches and read bedtime stories and went to PTA meetings and never ever raised his voice. A man who had folded the part of himself that had been a sniper into a small square and tucked it into the back of a closet the way he'd tucked the rifle. And he thought about how this morning that small square had unfolded itself. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. He pulled into the driveway of the small stucco house on Avocado Street. The babysitter's car was still parked at the curb. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 2:50. Caleb would be home from school in 10 minutes. He sat in the truck for a moment, both hands on the wheel. Then he reached over and picked up the rolled paper target. He looked at it for a long time. Then he opened the glove box, slid it inside, and closed it. Some things didn't need to be shown. Not today. Maybe not ever. The important thing wasn't the target. The important thing was that he'd held the rifle. He'd held the rifle, and he'd remembered. He got out of the truck. The babysitter, a sweet retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Alvarez, met him at the door. She'd let herself in with the spare key, the way she always did on shooting days. "How was the range?" she asked. "Quiet," Lennox said. "Mostly." "That's good. You needed quiet." "Yes, ma'am." She gathered her purse. "I'll see you Thursday, Mr. Harrow." "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez." She left. The house settled into its familiar afternoon stillness. Lennox carried the rifle case into the back bedroom, his bedroom, and placed it on the bed. He'd clean the rifle later after Caleb was asleep. For now, he just stood there for a moment, looking at the case. Then he heard the school bus rumble to a stop at the corner. He went to the front door and opened it. Down the sidewalk, a small figure with a too-big backpack came trudging toward him, sandy brown hair sticking up in the back where he'd slept on it the night before. Caleb saw his father and broke into a run. "Dad." "Hey, bud." Caleb hit him at full speed and wrapped his arms around Lennox's waist. Lennox put one big hand on the back of his son's head and just held him there for a second. "How was school?" "Good. We had pizza day." "How was the pizza?" "Bad, but it was still pizza day." Lennox laughed. The laugh surprised him. He hadn't laughed much lately. "Come on inside. Tell me about it." Caleb went inside, dumping his backpack by the door the way he wasn't supposed to, and being told about it the way he always was. Lennox followed him in and closed the door.
Dumps me.
He didn't think about the range again that afternoon. He didn't think about Ducker. He didn't think about the rifle sitting in its case on the bed in the back room. He thought about his son. He thought about pizza day. He thought about how the sound of a small boy laughing in a quiet kitchen was the only sound in the world that had ever managed to drown out the sound of a rifle going off. Outside, the sun was sinking toward the Pacific. Inside, the kitchen filled with the smell of macaroni and cheese and Lennox Harrow. Single dad retired. Seal. The man who had just put 5 rounds through one hole at 100 yards on a cold barrel stood at the stove in his apron and stirred the pot and listened to his son tell him about a kid named Marcus who'd traded him a chocolate milk for an apple. It was in every way that mattered the best afternoon he'd had in a long time. And he didn't know yet that 12 miles away in the parking lot of the Oceanside Marksmanship Range, Sergeant Michael Ducker was sitting in his pickup truck, his hands gripping the wheel hard enough to whiten the knuckles, doing exactly what Ray had said he would do. Figuring out how to come at this again. In the parking lot of the Oceanside Marksmanship Range, Sergeant Michael Ducker sat in his pickup truck and stared at his phone. His knuckles were white on the wheel. His jaw was clenched. On the seat beside him, Rojas was talking, but Ducker wasn't really hearing him. "Sergeant, Sergeant, Mike, Mike." Ducker blinked. "What?" "I said maybe we just let it go. That guy, I don't know who he is, but that wasn't a regular shooter. That was somebody. We don't gotta know who. We just gotta walk away." "Walk away?" "Yeah. Walk away from a guy who took $200 of my money in front of my Marines. Mike. Walk away from a guy who made me look like a boot in front of my own range." "He didn't make you..." "He absolutely made me look like a boot, Rojas. Don't tell me what I saw. I was there." Rojas didn't say anything. He was 24 years old and he liked Sergeant Ducker mostly, but he also knew when to stop talking, and right now was one of those times. Ducker stared at his phone for another long moment. Then he started scrolling. "What are you doing?" Rojas asked, looking him up. "Looking who up?" "Lennox Harrow." "How do you know his name?" Ducker held up the phone without looking at Rojas. The screen showed the sign-in sheet from Ray's clipboard photographed earlier that morning when Ducker had walked into the office to pay. He'd taken the picture out of habit. He took pictures of a lot of things. "L. Harrow," Ducker said. Lane 4, that's him. Okay, Rojas said carefully. And you're gonna do what with that exactly? I'm gonna find out who he is. Mike, come on, man. Just let it go. You're up for E7 next cycle. You got a sweet billet at the schoolhouse. Why are you? Because nobody outshoots me, Rojas. Ducker's voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than when it was loud. Nobody. Not in 11 years, not once. And I am not about to start losing to some guy in a Padres cap who walks in off the street with a deer rifle. It wasn't a deer rifle. It was a... I know what it was, Rojas. Okay? Ducker kept scrolling. Then he stopped. His thumb hovered over the screen. Huh. What? Bunch of Lennox Harrows out there? Ohio, Texas, New Mexico. He scrolled some more. Wait. He turned the screen toward Rojas. It was a small article from a community newspaper. The headline read, "Local Girl Scouts honor veterans at Memorial Day ceremony." The photograph showed a group of older men standing in a row, holding small American flags. At the end of the row, half cropped out of the frame, was a tall, lean man in a faded blue Padres cap looking at the ground. That's him, Rojas said. That's him. The caption read, "Veterans honored at the ceremony included left to right Frank DiMaglio Army, Carl Lindstrom Marines, Dale Waters Air Force, and Lennox Harrow Navy." Navy, Rojas said. He let out a slow breath. Sergeant, Mike, listen to me. If that man is Navy, and he can shoot like that. Sailors can't shoot like that. Right, exactly. Which means what? Rojas just looked at him. For a long moment, Ducker stared at the photograph. At the cropped-off shoulder of the man in the cap. At the way his head was tilted down like he didn't want to be in the picture. Like he didn't want to be anywhere. Something cold moved through Ducker's stomach. He pushed it down. Doesn't matter, he said. Doesn't matter what he was. Whatever he was, he's a civilian now. A washed-up civilian sitting on his couch in the middle of the day. You saw the truck. That truck's 8 years old. The man's a nobody. Mike, I want a rematch. Mike, listen. I want a rematch, and I'm gonna get one. And next time we're gonna do it on my terms with my equipment at my range in front of my guys. And we're gonna see how lucky he gets. Rojas closed his eyes for a second. All right, he said. All right, Sergeant. How you gonna find him? Ducker held up his phone again. This time the screen showed a different photograph from the same article. A wider shot. In the background, parked at the curb, was a dust-covered Ford F-150 with a small sticker on the rear window. The sticker read, "Caleb's dad." Ducker zoomed in. Then he zoomed in further on the license plate. "I got buddies at the station," he said. "I'll find him." He started the truck and pulled out of the lot. As he drove, his phone sat in the cup holder, the photograph still on the screen, the small white sticker glowing in the corner. Caleb's dad. 12 miles away. Lennox Harrow was setting 2 plates of macaroni and cheese on the kitchen table. Caleb climbed into his chair and immediately began picking the broccoli out of his portion. "Hey," Lennox said. "It's green. That's its job. Its job is to be in my macaroni. Its job is to keep you alive long enough to grow up and eat broccoli on purpose." Caleb considered this. "I'm never going to eat broccoli on purpose." "You will. I did." "You did." "I did, when I was about 30. "That's old." "Eat your broccoli, Caleb." The boy ate his broccoli. Lennox sat across from him and watched him eat the way he watched him do most things. There was a quiet, fierce attention in the way he watched his son, the kind of attention a man develops when he has lost the most important person in his life and has resolved on some level beneath conscious thought to never be looking the other way when something matters. "Dad?" "Yeah, bud." "Mrs. Petrowski said we have to do a project on someone we admire." "Yeah, And I have to write 3 paragraphs about them. 3 whole paragraphs. That's serious business. And I have to bring in a picture. I want to do it on you. Lennox's fork paused halfway to his mouth. On me, he said. Yeah. Bud, you don't want to do it on me. Why not? Because there are a lot more interesting people than your dad. Caleb shook his head. No, there aren't. Lennox set his fork down. He looked at his son across the table, at the small face still working on the macaroni, at the sandy hair that needed cutting, at the slight cowlick at the back that had been Caroline's cowlick too. For a moment, his throat tightened. What do you want to write about, Bud? That you were a soldier. I was a sailor. What's the difference? Different uniform. Did you have a gun? Yes. Did you shoot it? Sometimes. At people. Lennox was quiet for a moment. Bud, he said, I think for your project, why don't we write about how I'm a really good cook of macaroni and cheese? Caleb gave him a long, serious look. The kind of look that 7-year-olds give when they know they're being managed and don't appreciate it. Dad. Yeah. Mrs. Petrowski said I should pick someone who's brave. There are lots of kinds of brave. What kind are you? Lennox looked down at his plate. I used to be one kind, he said quietly. Now I'm trying to be another. What's the new kind? The kind that makes macaroni and cheese for you on a Tuesday night. Caleb thought about that. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Then I'll write about that one. After dinner, Lennox washed the dishes while Caleb did his reading on the couch. The water ran hot over his hands. He stared out the window above the sink at the small backyard at the lemon tree Caroline had planted the year Caleb was born, and he thought about the question his son had asked him. Did you shoot it at people? Duh. The answer was yes. The answer had been yes 37 times on 3 continents at distances ranging from 40 meters to 1,700. He remembered each one. Not the way you remember a bad dream. The way you remember a bill you've paid. A debt that's been settled line by line in the ledger of a long and complicated life. He hadn't fired a rifle in 4 years because he hadn't needed to. The world he'd built, the small stucco house, the school bus, the macaroni and cheese didn't require it. The man he'd been in that world had no place there. So that man had gone into a closet, and Lennox had shut the door. This morning he'd opened the door. Just for a few minutes. Just enough to remember. And now, standing at the sink, he found himself wondering not for the first time, but for the first time in a long while, whether the door was the kind of door that could be closed all the way again. He shut off the water. His phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up. The number wasn't one he recognized. Local area code. He let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text came through from the same number. Mr. Harrow. This is Sergeant Ducker from the range this morning. Hope there's no hard feelings. I owe you a rematch. Same place Saturday morning. Oh, 900. Make it interesting. Winner takes the whole purse. $1,000. Bring whatever you want to shoot. MD. Lennox read the message twice. Then he read it a third time slower. He set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a long moment with his hands flat on either side of it. Wall. In the living room, Caleb laughed at something in his book. The sound drifted in through the kitchen doorway light, and bright, the way it always did. The sound that drowned out the other sound. The sound that kept him here, in this house, in this life, instead of in the one he'd left behind. Lennox picked up the phone. He thought about not answering. He thought about that for a long time. Then he typed, Sergeant. No rematch. We're square. LH. He hit send and set the phone back down. It buzzed almost immediately. Simon, Mr. Harrow. Word travels at the schoolhouse. My guy's been talking. Got half the recon battalion asking who you are. You really want to leave it like that? Lucky shot civilian walks away. Lennox read it without reacting. Then another message. Saturday, 900. Bring your boy. Range has a kids area. Be a good day out. Lennox went very still. He read the line again. Bring your boy. The words sat on the screen. They sat there for what felt like a long time, but couldn't have been more than 3 seconds. In that 3 seconds, something inside Lennox Harrow that had been folded up small for 4 years began very slowly to unfold the rest of the way. He didn't reply. He set the phone down, walked into the living room, sat down on the couch next to his son. "What are you reading, bud?" Caleb held up the book. "Magic Treehouse." "Which one? The one with the dinosaurs?" "That's a good one. I read it already like 4 times. Read it a 5th. Caleb leaned against his father's shoulder. Lennox put his arm around the boy and pulled him closer. He sat there for a long time, listening to his son breathe, smelling the faint smell of school and crayons and child sweat that came off the top of his head. He didn't say anything. After a while, Caleb said, "Dad." "Yeah, bud." "Are you sad?" "No, bud. I'm not sad." "You look sad." "I'm thinking." "About what?" Lennox kissed the top of his son's head. "About a man I met this morning," he said, "and what kind of man I'm going to be tomorrow." Caleb thought about that. "Be the macaroni kind," he said. Lennox laughed very quietly. "I'll try, bud." Later, after Caleb was in bed, Lennox stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long time. He watched the small shape under the covers, the rise and fall of breathing, the nightlight glow on the wall. Then he closed the door, walked down the hall to his own room, and stopped in front of the rifle case on the bed. He stood there for a while. Then he opened it. He didn't take the rifle out. He just looked at her. The walnut stock, the matte black barrel, the loopholed scope scratched and reliable. He thought about what Ray had said. He's not going to let this go. Boys like that, they don't lose, not in front of their guys. He thought about the message. Bring your boy. He closed the case. Then he walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into the small spare room he used as an office. He sat down at the desk. He opened the bottom drawer. From the very back, under a stack of old tax returns, he pulled out a manila envelope. He hadn't opened the envelope in 4 years. He opened it now. Inside was a stack of paperwork, discharge papers, citations, photos. He set the photos aside without looking at them. He pulled out the cards. There were 3 of them. Plain white business cards. Each one had a name and a phone number. Nothing else. No title. No agency. No address. The first name was Doc Whitaker. Lennox stared at it for a moment. Doc had been the team medic. They'd kept in loose touch, a Christmas card here, a phone call there. The second was Marcus Bell, Master Chief Bell, the man who had recruited Lennox into the SEALs at 22 and trained him for the next 16 years. The third name was J. Thomas, just the initial, just the last name. James Thomas had been a captain when Lennox left. He'd be a commander now, maybe higher. He'd been Lennox's CO for the last 3 years of his career, and the man who had personally pinned the silver star on him in a small private ceremony, nobody outside the unit had ever known about. Lennox looked at the 3 cards for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. He thought about it. He set the phone down. He picked it up again. He pulled up the message thread with Ducker. He read the last line one more time. Bring your boy. Then he typed, Sergeant, I'll be there Saturday. Oh, 900. Without my son. You bring up my boy again in any context, in any way, and the contest is over before it starts. Are we clear? He hit send. The reply came in less than 30 seconds. Crystal, see you Saturday. Bring your A game. MD. Lennox set the phone down. He looked at the 3 business cards on the desk in front of him. After a long moment, he picked them up, slid them back into the envelope, and put the envelope back in the drawer. He didn't need to call any of them. Not yet. He walked down the hall and looked in on Caleb one more time. The boy was sound asleep, one arm flung up over his head, the way Caroline used to sleep. Lennox watched him breathe for a while. "Be the macaroni kind," he murmured. He closed the door. In his own bedroom, he sat down on the edge of the bed next to the rifle case. He laid one hand on the worn leather. He sat that way for a long time, not moving, not thinking about much of anything. Outside somewhere off in the dark, a dog barked once and was quiet. In his pocket, his phone buzzed one more time. He pulled it out. The message was from Ducker. "One more thing, bringing a few of the guys, just to watch. Hope you don't mind an audience." Lennox looked at the message. He didn't reply. He set the phone face down on the nightstand, opened the rifle case, and lifted the Remington out for the first time in 4 years that wasn't on a range. He carried her over to the small workbench in the corner of the room, sat down, and reached for the cleaning kit. The kit hadn't been touched in months. He'd been keeping it stocked anyway. Old habits. He spread the cloth on the bench. He laid out the brushes and the rod and the bottle of solvent. He worked the bolt out of the rifle and set it aside. He ran the brush down the bore. The bore was clean. He knew it was clean. He'd cleaned her before he packed her this morning, and he'd cleaned her after firing her. He cleaned her again anyway. Saturday was 4 days away. He had work to do. He had work to do, and the 4 days that followed went the way most of Lennox Harrow's days went, quiet-ordered, full of small things. He made breakfast. He drove Caleb to school. He went to the small woodworking shop he'd opened 3 years ago in a converted garage off Mission Avenue, where he made custom kitchen tables for people who didn't ask too many questions about the long, lean man with the calm eyes who built them. He sanded a tabletop. He stained it. He drove back to the school. He picked up Caleb. He made dinner. He read his son a chapter of Magic Treehouse. He kissed the boy on the forehead. He closed the door. Then he went into the spare room, sat down at the desk, and worked. He didn't fire the rifle again. He didn't need to. The work he was doing wasn't the kind of work you did with a rifle. It was the kind of work you did with a notebook and a pencil and a long memory. On Wednesday night, he sat at the desk and made a list of every shooting competition he'd ever entered, formal or informal, in his 18 years in the Navy. He counted 41. He had won 38 of them. The 3 he'd lost had been to the same man, a sniper named Ricky Halverson out of Team 2, who had been one of the 4 or 5 best shooters Lennox had ever known, and who had died in 2014 when his helicopter went down in the Hindu Kush. On Thursday night, he sat at the desk and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He wrote a letter to Caleb. Not a long one, just a few paragraphs. He folded it carefully, sealed it in an envelope, wrote, "For Caleb to be opened, if needed," on the front, and slid it into the bottom drawer next to the manila envelope. He did this not because he expected Saturday to go badly. He did this because he was a man who had been to war, and a man who has been to war does not leave loose ends when something simple is about to happen, because something simple has a way of becoming something else. On Friday afternoon, his phone rang while he was sanding the legs of the table. He pulled off his work gloves, wiped his hands on his jeans, and picked up the phone. It was Ray. "Lennox." "Ray." "You got a minute, son?" "Always." There was a pause. Lennox could hear the old man breathing on the other end of the line. The breathing of a man working his way up to something. "Word came down the line this morning," Ray said. "Ducker's been talking. A lot." "I figured. He's bringing more than a few guys tomorrow. He's bringing the whole instructor cadre from the Scout Sniper Schoolhouse. And he's bringing his platoon. And he's bringing some of the brass." Ray. He's making a thing out of it, son. He's selling it. He's telling everyone he's about to teach a civilian a lesson, and the schoolhouse is gonna come watch. Lennox was quiet for a long moment. How big a crowd are we talking about, Ray? 40, 50 Marines, maybe more. Plus, whoever they bring with them. Lennox closed his eyes. I told him no audience, he said quietly. I told him just him and me. He didn't tell them that. No. You can pull out, son. Nobody'd think the worse of you. I'd handle Ducker myself. That's not how it works, Ray. I know it's not. If I pull out, they spend the next 20 years telling the story their way. Some civilian came in, got lucky, and ran when it was time to back it up. That story moves through the schoolhouse, and it moves through the fleet, and by the time it gets to wherever it's going, the man in the Padres cap is a coward. I know. I'm not going to be a coward in their story, Ray. I'm not going to let my boy hear that story someday. I know. So I'll be there at 9. All right, son. I'll have lane 4 ready. Thank you. There was another pause. Lennox? Yeah, Ray? You sure you don't want me to make a phone call? I still got friends. I could put a stop to this. The base CO's a friend of mine. 1 call and Ducker's at a desk for the next month. Lennox thought about it. No, he said. If I have somebody else end this for me, it doesn't end. It just waits. All right, son. I'll see you at 9. He hung up. Then he stood there in the woodshop for a long time, the phone in his hand, listening to the small sounds of the afternoon. A dog barking down the block. A leaf blower somewhere a few streets over. The hum of the old refrigerator he kept in the corner for sodas. Then he set the phone down and picked the gloves back up. He had a tabletop to finish. That night at dinner, Caleb noticed. Caleb noticed most things, but he was particularly good at noticing his father, because his father was the only one left to notice. Dad. Yeah, bud. You're not eating. Lennox looked down at his plate. He'd been pushing the same bite of meatloaf around for 5 minutes. Sorry, bud. Got a lot on my mind. Work stuff. Sort of. Is it because of the man you met? Lennox looked up. Caleb was watching him with that serious 7-year-old face, the face that meant he was paying close attention and was prepared to keep paying attention until he got an answer that made sense. Yeah, bud, Lennox said. It's because of the man I met. Is he a bad man? Lennox considered the question. He's not a bad man, he said slowly. He's a man who hasn't figured something out yet. What hasn't he figured out? That being good at something doesn't make you better than other people. Caleb nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. Maybe it did. 7-year-olds understand a lot more than people give them credit for. Are you going to see him again? Tomorrow morning, just for a little while. Then I'm coming home. Can I come? No, bud. Why not? Lennox set his fork down. Because grown-ups have grown-up business sometimes, he said. And tomorrow morning is grown-up business. Mrs. Alvarez is going to come over and watch you. You're going to have pancakes. I'll be home before lunch. You promise? I promise. Caleb thought about that for a minute. Then he said, Dad. Yeah. If the man tries to be mean to you, you should tell him to be nice. I'll do my best. And if he won't be nice, you should just leave. That's good advice, bud. Mrs. Petrowski says that's what you should always do. Mrs. Petrowski's a smart lady. She is. They finished dinner. Saturday morning came up gray over Oceanside, the kind of marine layer that softens the world and makes everything sound a little farther away than it is. Lennox was up at 5:30. He drank his coffee at the kitchen table. He sat there for a long time looking out the window at the lemon tree. At 6:30, he went into the back bedroom and got dressed. Jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, The same faded Padres cap. His old work boots scuffed at the toes. He looked at himself in the mirror over the dresser for a moment. The man looking back was a man he'd seen many times. The man who packed school lunches. The man who built tables. The man who said yes when he wanted to say no. He nodded once to that man and went to get the rifle case. Mrs. Alvarez arrived at 7:45. Caleb was still in his pajamas eating cereal at the table. "Morning, Mr. Harrow." "Morning, Mrs. Alvarez." "Big day." "Just a meeting." "On a Saturday." "Sometimes that's how it goes." She didn't push. That was one of the things he liked about her. She'd raised 3 boys of her own, and she knew when a man didn't want to talk about where he was going. He kissed Caleb on the top of his head. "Be good for Mrs. Alvarez." "I will. I'll be home before lunch." "You promised." "I know I did." He went out the front door and down the walk to the truck. He set the rifle case in the passenger seat. He started the engine. For a long moment he sat there with both hands on the wheel. Then he put the truck in gear and pulled out. He pulled into the gravel lot of the Oceanside Marksmanship Range at 8:45. He saw the crowd before he saw anything else. Ray hadn't been exaggerating. The lot was packed. Pickup trucks and SUVs and one big black bus with U.S. Marines stenciled on the side. Men in uniform, men in civvies, a few older men in ball caps with unit insignia. They were standing in clusters drinking from styrofoam cups talking. When Lennox's dust-covered F-150 pulled into the lot, the talking didn't stop, but it did get a little quieter. Heads turned. Eyes followed him as he parked. He killed the engine. He sat there for a moment. Then he reached for the rifle case and got out. The talking went all the way quiet now. 50-60 Marines, all of them watching the lean man in the Padres cap, walk across the gravel. A few of them whispered to each other. A few of them just stared. A young corporal stepped into his path. "Sir, are you Mr. Harrow?" "I am." "Sergeant Ducker said to bring you to Lane 4 when you arrived." "I know where Lane 4 is, son." "Yes, sir." "Boy." The corporal stepped aside. Lennox walked past him through the crowd. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't make eye contact. He just walked the rifle case at his side, the cap pulled low. At the screen door of the office, Ray was standing with his arms folded. "Morning, Ray." "Morning, son. You ready for this?" "I'm here." "That's not the same thing." Lennox almost smiled. "I know it's not." Ray glanced over his shoulder at the lanes. Lennox followed his eyes. Sergeant Michael Ducker was set up at Lane 2. He was wearing his utilities, the Scout Sniper Instructor patch, crisp and clean on his shoulder. He had a different rifle today. Lennox could see it from here, a custom Macmillan TAC-50 in a beautiful tactical paint job with a Schmidt and Bender scope on top that was worth more than most cars. It was a long-range gun. A big-bore, hard-hitting, expensive gun. Behind Ducker, 3 other Marines were setting up spotting scopes. 2 more were running cameras. "He brought cameras," Lennox said quietly. "He brought cameras. He's gonna film this. He's gonna film this." Lennox was quiet for a moment. "Ray." "Yeah." "What's the course of fire?" He said it. 10 shots, mixed distances. 2 at 100, 2 at 300, 2 at 500, 2 at 700, 2 at 1,000. Lennox closed his eyes. 1,000 yards. From a cold barrel. With a Remington 700 in .308 that he hadn't fired in any meaningful capacity in 4 years, against a man with a custom .50 caliber rifle worth $15,000 and a Schmidt and Bender scope. He opened his eyes. "All right," he said. "You can still walk away, son." "No, I can't." "All right." Lennox started toward Lane 4. "Lennox." He turned, and Ray had taken a step out from the doorway. The old Marine's face was set in something Lennox hadn't seen on him before. Something hard and proud and a little bit angry. "You shoot for yourself today," Ray said. "Not for him, not for them, not for me. You shoot for yourself and for the man you used to be, and you let everyone else worry about themselves." Lennox looked at the old man for a long moment. "Yes, sir," he said. He walked to lane 4. The Marines parted as he came through. Some of them were still whispering. Some of them had stopped. A few of the older ones, men with gray in their hair, men with the look of senior NCOs who had seen too much to be impressed by spectacle, were watching him with an entirely different kind of attention than the young guys were. They were watching the way he walked, the way he carried the rifle case, the set of his shoulders. Yo. One of them, a tall, craggy gunny with a salt and pepper mustache, leaned over to the man next to him and said something quiet. The other man looked at Lennox, then back at the gunny, and his eyebrows went up. Lennox set the case down on the bench at lane 4, popped the latches, lifted the lid. There she was, the Remington, walnut, matte black, old. He lifted her out. At lane 2, Ducker stood up from his bench and turned. The grin was already on his face. He walked over, hand extended. "Mr. Harrow, glad you made it." Lennox didn't shake the hand. "Sergeant, you ready to do this?" "What's the course of fire?" "Ray told you. I want to hear it from you." 10 shots, 2 each at 100, 300, 500, 700, and 1,000. Best score wins. Hits inside the 10 ring score full points. 8 ring 8 points. 5 ring 5. Anything outside the 5 ring is a miss. He grinned. Misses are 0. And the wager. $1,000. Cash. I brought it. You bring yours. Lennox reached into his back pocket. He pulled out an envelope, slid it across the bench. Ducker opened it, counted again. 1,200, Ducker said. 200 extra. For what? For my time. If I lose, you keep it all. If I win, I take the whole 1,200 plus your 1,000. That's the wager. Ducker laughed. You're a confident man, Mr. Harrow. I'm a tired man, Sergeant. I want this done. All right, then. Ducker handed the envelope to one of his Marines. $2,200 total. Winner takes the whole pot. He held out his hand again. Lennox shook it this time. The grip was hard. He didn't return the pressure. He just held the hand for a moment, met Ducker's eyes, and let go. Sergeant. Yeah. Before we start. What? Lennox stepped a little closer. He spoke very quietly, just for Ducker. You sent me a message 4 nights ago, he said. You mentioned my son. Ducker's grin faltered just for a second. Just being friendly. That's not friendly, Sergeant. It was I want you to understand something. I'm here today because of that message. Not because of the money. Not because of the contest. Because of that message. He paused. His pale blue eyes did not leave Ducker's face. You ever do anything like that again ever, and we will be having a very different kind of conversation. Are we clear? Ducker's face went through several small expressions in rapid succession. The grin tried to come back. It didn't quite make it. Crystal, he said. Good. Lennox stepped back. Let's shoot. Ray walked to the center of the firing line. He held up his hands. The crowd quieted. Listen up. Course of fire is 10 shots, 2 at each of 5 distances starting at 100 and ending at 1,000. Hits scored on standard NRA target rings. Sergeant Ducker shoots first at each distance. Mr. Harrow follows. We score after each pair. He looked at both men. Range is hot. Eyes and ears on. Shooters, take your benches. Ducker walked back to lane 2. He settled in behind the Macmillan. He racked the bolt with a satisfying metallic clack. Lennox sat down behind the Remington. He breathed out through his nose. Somewhere in the crowd behind him he could hear someone muttering, That's a .308 against a 50 caliber at 1,000 yards. He's nuts. Somewhere else, a different voice lower. You sure that's all he's got? And from the gunny with the salt and pepper mustache, even quieter, almost to himself, I'd like to see what the man can do. Lennox put his eye to the scope. The 100-yard target was crisp, centered, familiar. In the back of his mind, the chief's voice spoke up again. The voice from 4 years ago, the voice from 20 years ago. Slow as smooth Harrow, smooth as fast. He breathed out. He held at the bottom. At lane 2, Ducker fired his first round. Crack. The big .50 thundered, and the muzzle blast rolled across the range. Crack. Second round. Ray called out. Sergeant Ducker, 100 yards 2 in the 10 ring. 20 points. The crowd murmured approving. A perfect start. Mr. Harrow, you're up. Lennox pressed the trigger. The Remington spoke soft and clean compared to the cannon at lane 2. He worked the bolt. He pressed again. 2 shots. He didn't look at the target. Ray walked down range with the spotting scope. He stood there for a long moment. He turned back. Mr. Harrow? Ray called out, his old voice carrying, 2 in the 10 ring, 20 points. The murmuring shifted. The contest had begun. 8 more shots stood between Lennox Harrow and the man he was trying to remember how to be. He worked the bolt and chambered the next round. And the morning settled into the strange, focused quiet that always came over a range when the shooting got serious. Ray called out the 300-yard line. Ducker's spotter relayed the wind, 2 miles an hour quartering. Ducker settled in. The Macmillan boomed twice, and the spotter clicked his stopwatch and called the hits. Sergeant Ducker, 300 yards, 2 in the 10 ring, 20 points, 40 total. The crowd made an approving sound. Mr. Harrow, you're up. Lennox didn't move at first. He was reading the wind. Not with the spotter's flag. With the small hairs on the back of his neck, with the way the air moved against his cheek, with the faint shimmer of heat coming off the asphalt apron. He'd done this 10,000 times before. The math wasn't math anymore. It was breathing. He breathed out. He pressed. Crack. He worked the bolt. Pressed. Crack. Ray walked the line. Looked. Came back. Mr. Harrow, 300 yards, 2 in the 10 ring, 20 points, 40 total. The crowd's noise changed pitch. The young Marines were starting to look at each other. The older ones were starting to look at Lennox. Ducker's grin was still in place, but it had become a permanent feature, now fixed and slightly tight, the way a man's smile gets when he's holding it on with his teeth. 500, Ray called. Sergeant Ducker. Ducker shot. The spotter called. 10, 10. 20 points, 60 total. Mr. Harrow. Lennox shot. Ray looked. 10, 10, 20 points, 60 total. A low murmur ran through the crowd. The gunny with the salt and pepper mustache stepped a little closer to the firing line. Ray noticed. He didn't say anything. 700, Ray called. Body. This was the distance where the .308 started to feel its limits. 700 yards was on the edge of what the cartridge wanted to do well. The big .50 caliber that Ducker was firing didn't care about 700 yards. The .50 didn't really start working until 1,000. Ducker shot a smug little double tap. Boom. Boom. Sergeant Ducker, 700, 2 in the 10 ring, 80 total. Ducker leaned back from the bench, stretched his neck and looked across at Lennox's lane. He couldn't help himself. Hot one, Mr. Harrow, he called out. Wind's picking up. Lennox didn't answer. The wind had in fact picked up. Maybe 4 miles an hour now, almost full value from the right. He felt it on his face. He read it off the high grass beyond the berm, the way it bent and flickered. He made the adjustment in his head. He didn't touch the scope. Yes, he breathed out. He pressed. Crack. He worked the bolt. Held a half-second longer this time. The wind had shifted by about half a mile an hour. He adjusted. He pressed. Crack. Ray walked downrange with the spotting scope. He stood at the 700-yard berm for a long moment. Then he came back. He didn't say it loud this time. He said it almost soft. "Mr. Harrow, 700, 2 in the 10 ring." The crowd went very quiet. "Yes," a young Marine in the second row said audibly, "with a .308. The gunny with the salt and pepper mustache turned his head and gave the young Marine a look that shut him up. Ducker had stopped grinning. 80 total, Ray said. Tied at 80. Ducker stood up from his bench. He walked over to his spotter. They had a conversation Lennox couldn't hear, but he could see Ducker's hands moving. The spotter shook his head once. Ducker said something else. The spotter shrugged. "Last station," Ray called. 1,000 yards. Sergeant Ducker." Ducker walked back to his bench. He sat down behind the Macmillan. He took a long time settling in. He adjusted his cheek weld. He worked the bolt slowly. He put his eye to the Schmidt and Bender. He fired. Boom. The big rifle's report rolled across the range. The spotter watched, then said quietly, 8 ring, low left. Ducker swore under his breath. He worked the bolt, settled back in, then fired. Boom. The spotter watched. 10. Sergeant Ducker, 1,000 yards, 8 and 10, 18 points. Ray's old voice was very calm. 98 total. Wakey. The crowd murmured. 98 out of 100 was a beautiful score. At 1,000 yards with the conditions, with the pressure, nobody could fault the shooting. Even Lennox, watching from his lane, gave the man a small internal nod of professional respect. The 8 had been a wind call. He'd misread the gust. The follow-up had been good. Ducker stood up from the bench. He turned to face Lennox's lane. "Your turn, Mr. Harrow." He said it loud, so everyone could hear. "You need 99 to win. You need a 10 and a 9, with a .308, at 1,000 yards. He let the words hang in the air. "Take your time, partner." Lennox didn't look at him. He sat down behind the Remington. He laid his cheek to the stock. He felt the cold walnut against his face. He breathed in through his nose and breathed out slow through his mouth. He thought about Caroline. He didn't know why. He hadn't planned to. But she came to him in that moment the way she sometimes did not in any specific image, not as a memory, just as a presence. The way she would have stood behind him at this bench and not said a word. The way she had always known when not to say a word. He thought about Caleb eating cereal at the kitchen table in his pajamas. He thought about the chief dead 3 years now who had taught him that the trigger was not something you pulled. The trigger was something you let go of. He put his eye to the loophole. The 1,000-yard target stood pale and small at the end of the world. The wind flickered through the grass. He watched it. He watched it for a long time. The loophole was an old scope, but it was a true scope. Its turrets were precise. He'd zeroed her at 100 a long time ago, and he knew her drops by heart. At 1,000 yards with a 175 grain match round, she was about 36 minutes of angle low. He didn't dial. He held over. He'd held over 1,000 times. He held over now. The wind was 3.5, quartering right to left. He held into it. He breathed out. He pressed. Crack. The Remington bucked into his shoulder. He didn't work the bolt right away. He held the picture in the scope. Watched the trace, the faint thread of disturbed air the bullet leaves in its wake, and at 1,000 yards with a long-range shot like this, you can see the trace if you know where to look. He saw it. He saw where it ended. He worked the bolt. He laid his cheek back down. Ray was already walking. Behind him, two younger Marines were jogging to keep up. They reached the 1,000-yard target. They gathered around it. Ray looked. He looked for a long time. He turned and walked back. He stopped halfway up the line where everyone could hear him. 10 ring, he said. The crowd let out a breath it hadn't known it was holding. One more shot, Ray said. Mr. Harrow needs a 9 to tie, a 10 to win. Ducker at lane 2 was very still. The fixed grin was gone. His face had become the face of a man watching something he could not look away from. Lennox didn't move from the bench. He breathed. He held over. He held into the wind. He thought about the chief. Slow is smooth Harrow. Smooth is fast. He thought about the man who had been kneeling on a rooftop in Ramadi in 2006, 1,800 yards from a doorway he had to keep his team out of. The man who had held over and held into the wind, and breathed out and let go of the trigger, and watched a man who was about to detonate a vest die on the threshold, instead of taking his teammates with him. He thought about the man who had come home from that rooftop, and the next rooftop, and the next, and every other rooftop, and who had eventually taken off the uniform and folded it into a footlocker because he was tired, because he had a wife, because he had a son. He thought about the man he was now, the man in the Padres cap, the man who built tables, the man who said yes when he wanted to say no. He breathed out. He pressed. Crack. The Remington spoke for the 10th time. Then he worked the bolt one final time. The spent casing arced through the air and pinged against the concrete and rolled until it came to rest beside the first one. The very first one from 4 days ago, which Ray had picked up on Tuesday morning and put in his pocket, and which now somewhere inside the office sat on a shelf above his desk like a small brass relic. Ray walked down range. The two young Marines walked with him. They reached the 1,000-yard target. Ray bent down. He looked through the spotting scope. He kept looking. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ray straightened up. He turned to the firing line. He walked slow all the way back. Past lane 4. Past Lennox sitting at his bench. Past the rows of Marines watching in absolute silence. He walked all the way to the center of the firing line, and he stood there, and he held up the spotting scope, and he held up the target they had pulled it for him, and he held it where every man could see. There were 2 holes in the target. Both of them were inside the X-ring. Both of them were touching. Mr. Harrow, Ray said, and his voice was strong and clear and old. The voice of a Marine who had survived Khe-Sanh and a lot of other things besides. 1,000 yards, 2 in the X-ring, 20 points. He paused. 100 total. A perfect score. A man with a stock, Remington 700 in .308 on a cold barrel against a $15,000 custom .50 caliber on a 100-yard, 300-yard, 500-yard, 700-yard, and 1,000-yard course of fire. A perfect score. Nobody made a sound. Then somewhere in the middle of the crowd, the gunny with the salt and pepper mustache lifted his hand and brought it slowly to the brim of his cover. He saluted. He didn't say a word. He just saluted. The man next to him, an older First Sergeant Lennox didn't know, did the same. Then another one. Then another. Then 5 at once. Then 10. Then 20. Then every senior Marine in the crowd, every man who had been around long enough to recognize what he was looking at, was standing at attention, with his hand at the brim of his cover, holding the salute. The young Marines, the ones who didn't quite understand yet, looked around in confusion for half a second. Then they figured it out. And they came to attention too. And they saluted too. Lennox did not stand up. He sat at the bench, the Remington in front of him, both hands on the stock. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the salutes. He looked at the rifle. He let out a long, slow breath. Lennox. It was Ray standing at his elbow now. Yeah, Ray. Stand up, son. In a minute, Ray. All right. Ray waited. After a long moment, Lennox stood. He turned to face the crowd. The Marines were still saluting. He looked at them. He looked at the gunny. First the man had recognized something, and Lennox understood what. Then he looked at Sergeant Michael Ducker. Ducker was standing at lane 2. His hand was at his cover too. He was saluting. His face was wet. Not with tears exactly, with something else. With the particular kind of moisture that comes to a man's face when he has spent 11 years building a thing about himself and has just watched that thing be taken apart in front of everyone he respects and is realizing slowly, painfully all at once that the thing was never as solid as he thought it was. Lennox looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He brought his own hand up. Aye. He returned the salute. Not to Ducker, not to any of them really. To the work, to the years, to the men who had taught him and the men who had stood next to him and the men who had not come home. To the chief dead in Mosul. To the team scattered to the four winds. To the young man he had been. To the older man he had become. He held the salute for a count of 3. He brought his hand down. The crowd brought their hands down. Nobody knew what to do next. Ducker walked across the line. Slow. Careful. Like a man approaching a fire. He stopped at lane 4. He didn't look at Lennox. He held out the envelope. $1,200, plus another envelope thicker, the 1,000 he'd brought. Mr. Harrow, he said. His voice was very quiet. Your winnings. Lennox took the envelopes. He folded them once. He slid them into his back pocket. Sergeant? Yes, sir. The sir came out before Ducker could stop it. He flinched very slightly as he heard himself say it. Look at me, Sergeant. Ducker looked up. Lennox's pale blue eyes held his. I'm going to tell you something, Lennox said, and I want you to hear it. Not the way you've been hearing things. The other way. The way you used to hear things before you got good at one thing and started thinking that one thing was enough. Yes, sir. You're a good shooter, Sergeant. You've got real skill. The first time we shot 4 days ago, you put a 1 1/4 inch group at 100 yards with a semi-auto on a cold barrel. That's not nothing. That's a lot of work and a lot of natural talent. You earned that. Ducker's jaw worked. He didn't say anything. What you didn't earn, Lennox said, is the right to walk into a man's lane and treat him like he's nothing because he doesn't look like you think a shooter ought to look. That part you didn't earn. You stole that part. From every man who ever taught you anything. From every man who ever wore the same patch you're wearing. You stole it from yourself mostly. Because the man who taught you to shoot, and I don't know who he was, but I know the type that man would not have been proud of how you behaved Tuesday morning. And he would not have been proud of why you set this up today. Ducker was breathing hard now, through his nose, trying to keep it together. You hear me, Sergeant? Yes, sir. I'm not your enemy. I'm not your competition. I'm a guy who came out to a range to shoot his rifle 4 days ago, and what I learned out here, what you taught me, is that I forgot something I shouldn't have forgotten. So thank you for that, truly. I needed the reminder. You did me a kindness, even if you didn't mean to. Ducker blinked. But Sergeant, the last thing I want to say to you, the thing I want you to take with you and carry. Yes, sir. Don't ever in your career mistake a quiet man for a soft man. There are a lot of quiet men in this country, and most of them are not the men you think they are. Some of them are exactly the men you think they are, but some of them are people you should be very, very careful about, and you cannot tell which is which by looking. That's the lesson, Sergeant. It's an old lesson, older than you and older than me. But you learned it today, and that means it cost you something, and that means it'll stick. Most lessons don't stick unless they cost something. He paused. Are we square, Sergeant? Ducker swallowed. Yes, sir, he said. We're square. Good. Lennox turned. He walked back to lane 4. He sat down behind the Remington. He worked the bolt one last time, made sure she was clear, set the bolt aside, and began packing her into her case. Slow, methodical, the way he'd packed her 10,000 times before. The crowd was beginning to move now. Quiet conversation. The hum of men who had just witnessed something they would be telling stories about for a long time. The gunny with the salt and pepper mustache walked over to lane 4. He stood at a respectful distance. "Mr. Harrow." Lennox looked up. "Gunny, don't suppose you want to tell me where you served?" Lennox studied the older man for a moment. "Coronado," he said. The gunny nodded once. Slow. "That's what I figured." "Yeah." "How long?" 18 years. "Team?" 3, mostly. The gunny let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Lennox. He didn't smile. He didn't try to make a moment of it. He just nodded one more time. "It was an honor to watch you shoot today, sir." "It was an honor to be watched, gunny." The older man touched the brim of his cover, turned, and walked away. Lennox finished packing the rifle. He closed the case. He latched it. Ray was standing at the office door. "Lennox." "Ray." "You headed home." "I am." "Tell that boy I said hello." "I will." Lennox picked up the case. He walked across the gravel toward the truck. The crowd parted for him the way it had parted on his way in, but it was a different parting now. The young Marines did not whisper. The older ones nodded. One or two of them touched their covers. He reached the truck. He laid the case across the passenger seat. He climbed in. He started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he could see Sergeant Michael Ducker still standing at lane 2. He was looking down at his rifle. He wasn't moving. Lennox put the truck in gear. He pulled out of the gravel lot onto the surface road and pointed the F-150 toward home. The drive took 28 minutes. He drove in silence again, the radio off his hands, steady on the wheel. He didn't think about the contest. He didn't think about Ducker. He didn't think about the salutes or the gunny or the silence of 50 Marines watching a paper target swing back from 1,000 yards. He thought about pancakes. He thought about the smell of pancakes in his kitchen on a Saturday morning, and the sound of a small boy clattering a fork against a plate, and the way Caroline had once on a Saturday morning, very much like this one, leaned across the table and kissed him on the cheek for no reason at all. He pulled into the driveway at 9:46. Mrs. Alvarez's car was still at the curb. He sat in the truck for a moment, both hands on the wheel. Then he reached over, opened the glove box, took out the rolled paper target from Tuesday morning, and unrolled it on the seat beside him. He looked at the small, ragged hole in the center for a long time. Then he rolled it back up. He opened the door. He carried the rifle case and the target up the front walk. He went inside. Caleb came barreling out of the kitchen. "Dad." "Hey, bud. You're home before lunch." "I told you I would be." "Did your meeting go okay?" Yeah. Lennox knelt down. He set the rifle case on the floor. He held the rolled paper target out to his son. "It went fine, bud." "What's that?" "A target, from the range." "Did you shoot it?" "I did." "Can I see?" Lennox unrolled the target. He held it open between his hands, the small ragged hole right in the middle, and his son looked at it, and his eyes got very big. "Dad? Dad?" "Yeah, bud. You shot it like 100 times in the same hole." "5 times, bud. 5. "Dad, that's amazing." Lennox looked at his son. "You want to keep it," he said. "For your project." Caleb's eyes went even bigger. "Mrs. Petrowski's gonna flip out." "I bet she will." "What kind of brave is this, Dad?" Lennox thought about it for a long moment. He looked down at the target. He looked at his son. "It's the old kind, bud," he said quietly. "The old kind. But it's only there to make sure the new kind keeps working. The macaroni kind." Caleb didn't entirely understand. but he nodded the way 7-year-olds do when they understand that something important has been said, even if they can't quite hold it yet. Dad. Yeah, bud. Can we have pancakes now? Lennox laughed. He stood up. He scooped his son up with one arm and carried him into the kitchen where Mrs. Alvarez was already pulling out the griddle. We can have pancakes, bud. With chocolate chips. With chocolate chips. He set the boy down at the table. He hung his cap on the hook by the door. He rolled up his sleeves and went to the cabinet and pulled down the flour. Outside, the marine layer was burning off, and the sun was coming through the kitchen window in long gold bars. The lemon tree in the backyard was heavy with fruit. In a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of a desk in the spare room, 3 white business cards sat undisturbed, and would continue to sit undisturbed, and in time would gather dust, and in more time would be forgotten, because the man who had pulled them out 4 nights ago had not needed them after all. Why? He had needed only the rifle, and the morning, and the long quiet walk back to the man he had once been, just long enough to remember that the man he was now had been built on top of him, and that the foundation was still there, and was still solid, and would always be there if the day ever came when he needed it again. That day had come. He had stood on the foundation. He had done what was asked. And then he had gone home to his son. Lennox Harrow was 41 years old. He was a single father. He was a retired Navy SEAL. He built kitchen tables in a converted garage off Mission Avenue, and he packed his son's lunch in the morning, and he read him Magic Treehouse at night, and he was a quiet man, the kind of quiet man you could pass on the street 100 times without ever noticing. He had been underestimated for the last time, and he would never be underestimated again.